welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, episode 83. This is the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, and the questers that are Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And there we are. On today's episode, we will be discussing all things quizzical, because we got another little small stack of emails. One from a returning friend, Kogorsi, and I get to do my voice later, so if you don't like it, sorry, tough. But other than that, we're going to get to all things Arrow-entical, because today's discussion, after the email questions, is about Alamaise, the Elfbane dragon. So we'll get there shortly. Until then, let's get through the emails as fast as we possibly can, because this actually episode might go longer than an hour. How's that sound?
Fine with me.
Cool. Hi, Josh and Dan. If you're looking for more content along with dragons and horrors, I would love to hear descriptions and discussions on all the various secret societies and cults in Earthdawn. Thanks for continuing a great show, K. Scott. Thoughts?
I think that's more stuff for us to talk about. We kind of talked a little bit, not so much about the secret societies, but a couple of the ones in the secret societies book from first edition are cults or secret societies organized around the Mad Passions. There's one for each of the three Mad Passions in that book, and we didn't really talk about them when we were discussing
Passions?
the Passion and their questors back in those earlier episodes. So
Yeah. No,
we can visit them, but also the other ones as well. We kind of mentioned the Dragon's Network. I think is one of the ones that's mentioned in that book as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get through those. I've got the Houses of the Serpent River kind of planned shortly, a few months down the road, and then the secret societies as well, just to kind of cover all of our bases and all the other source books that might need to be updated for 4th editions. That's why we have Josh here. Next email from Brian. Hi there. I was just surprised when someone asked whether the Lightbringer or Bodyguard disciplines would be coming to 4th edition as paths that you didn't recommend looking at the Panda Gaming Grove blog. The Panda, of course, being Morgan Weeks, who has a major hand in writing the rules for Earthdawn these days. I know that he has relatively recently made a Lightbearer path, and there is a Bodyguard discipline as well to Circle 8. From before paths were a thing, if he gets around to it, I suspect he'd convert it to a path nowadays. But of course, he only has so much time to do all the things he'd like to do. Now, of course, new material on that site is not official, but it is still written by someone who knows their stuff quite well. Furthermore, if there is an official release at some point, it is likely that there will have been some lessons learned from these earlier designs, so if anyone is interested in seeing that material made official, it's not a terrible idea to use what has been written and let him know what works well, and if something doesn't work well, to do your best to explain why. In the meanwhile, it is much easier than designing the entire thing from scratch yourself. Smiley face. Not to mention, it is a useful resource for a variety of other reasons as well. The Rogues Gallery is a GM's treasure trove, and the new creatures can provide some encounters that your players may not instantly recognize and be able to recite the lore word for word. In our group, we've enjoyed many of the rules changes on the blog, although we admittedly do not use every single one of them. Just thought I'd pop in to share a few words. Brian.
Yes, if I have not mentioned Morgan's blog in the past,
we have been remiss.
I have often talked about how wonderful Morgan is and how much of a friend and
co-creator
and partner in design and whatnot he has been since he agreed to help way back when we were working on the core books. But if I had not mentioned his blog, absolutely check out the blog, Panda Gaming Grove, Panda's Earthdawn Gaming Grove. You'll be able to find it there. There is so much stuff there. In fact, it was his blog in the first place, and all of the analysis and so forth of the 3rd edition material that he had done kind of at that point that drew our attention and led us to ask him to contribute. Yeah, the Rogues Gallery is a whole bunch of Game Master characters, a lot of them adepts, something that Morgan has been working on, trying to find good ways to simplify Game Master character adepts for use in a game, particularly if they are intended to sort of be combat, just sort of a one-off kind of thing, rather than going to all the effort of necessarily creating a full adept with all the talents and skills and everything, and just kind of statting them out and setting the stat block as a creature with some specific powers that are flavorful depending on the discipline. It's really, really cool. And yeah, some of the stuff that he has developed for books that have come out was the result of stuff that he had been working on and thinking about before. And there is some stuff in there that is absolutely the result of things that we have learned over the course of the past few years of 4th edition development, the sort of pie in the sky, maybe if at some point in the distant future we go to a new edition, the type of, I think, maybe more radical revisualization of Earthdawn. Because I think that if Morgan and or I are still around for the point of a 5th edition, that we would both want to do a much more radical reconceptualization of some of the stuff in the game.
Fair. And that'll
but
be
that is also gosh.
Look at my wrist at the time. Nice? I have to be somewhere else. Yeah, that'll be a whole different episode on a podcast is, if we could, would we? How would we do it? What would we do? We'll shelve that for a later discussion when we're out of things to talk about.
Like when we get around to like episode 200 or something.
Yeah, if we get that far. We'll tackle 2 emails we got from Rasmus now, because he sent 2 of them in back to back. So, hi, later arrival to your brilliant podcast. So currently listening to episode 18. He's about 65 episodes behind, which is fine. So Josh has to think now about 30 odd weeks in the past. You talked about coins and the possibility to 3D print some. Why not add that to your next Kickstarter as an add-on? You could do both .sll files for the do-it-yourself types, but more important, you could sell real Barsaivian metal coins. That would be awesome. It should be doable, as a lot of board games on Kickstarter has that as an option as well. Anyway, just an idea. Keep up the excellent work with the podcast. Love listening to it whenever I have time.
That is an interesting idea. We are starting to investigate 3D printed stuff. The Aetherstream Interceptor tabletop board game thing, the prototypes were 3D printed, and the designs of the fighters were kind of put together in STL files, I guess is the type that it is, so that they could be 3D printed, although the actual plan was to have them more traditionally manufactured. The plan is at some point to still have that game come together. There's some play testing and revisions and stuff like that going on.
Yeah.
The difficulty of doing a stretch goal that is a different kind of product like that complicates the logistics and handling and fulfillment of a Kickstarter. And also just in general, from the lessons that we learned in the first Kickstarter, that we don't want to offer stretch goals or add-ons that are going to end up requiring a lot of extra work. But that may be something to toss out there as a question for the various locations, like on Twitter or the Discord or the group, and say, hey, if this is something that we offered, is this something that people would be interested in as a tchotchke, as a little add-on kind of thing, and get a sense of what would be the potential interest and whether it would be worthwhile.
Well,
I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting idea because I am a little bit just personally gun shy about the idea of doing stuff that is not books or posters or stuff that like all comes out of the same sort of print location, because then we need to coordinate with potentially another provider to do that sort of thing, and handling the fulfillment, and there's a lot of sort of logistical questions that come up there. But it maybe worth something investigating if people actually. Yeah,
I think we can go back to like the Earthdawn dice that Q Workshop put out and see, because they were retailed, I think, for $24 or $30 American, and then now they're for sale on eBay for like $80. So I don't know. We could. Not my part of the end, but we can take a look at it. So Rasmus's second email, because now he's on to episode 19. Sorry for revisiting old stuff. Feel free to ignore if you don't want to spend time on old stuff. I'm not a big fan of Beastmasters in general because of their menagerie and easy way to control animal encounters. But I really don't understand why they get Claw Frenzy. They then have a multi-attack talent in Journeyman tier where the other fighting disciplines get at their Master tier. What was the design choice behind this? This talent is just kind of crazy. I've always house ruled that that's a second attack, as that is more on par with other disciplines. Okay, Rasmus has a question about Beastmasters and Claw Frenzy.
Yeah. So, a couple of things. One, Claw Frenzy goes back all the way to first edition. Claw Frenzy was available to Beastmasters, I believe, at 8th Circle in first edition, and has always been a kind of iconic Beastmaster ability that they get just claw shape and unarmed combat, and then they don't get any additional kind of attack until they get Claw Frenzy, which is a huge spike in their combat output. It is the point at which, especially in first edition, the Windling Beastmaster would be
a holy terror.
Banana pants, because they could spend a karma on each attack that they make with Claw Frenzy and each damage test that they make using the claw shape through Claw Frenzy, and can burn through a whole lot of karma in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
The first edition version of Claw Frenzy was kind of broken, especially because it allowed so many attacks and didn't have the later fixes where missing an attack would break the chain. Yeah. You would have to decide how many attacks you were going to make, and you would take that much strain. In first edition, if you missed an attack in the sequence, it didn't matter. You could still make the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
In second edition, I believe, and in later iterations of the talent, the basic idea was you still needed to decide how many attacks you were going to make, but if an attack in the sequence missed, that would stop the chain. So, fourth edition kept Claw Frenzy because it was kind of iconic, and because it was in the Journeyman tier, it did not get the attention that the other multi-attack talents that appear in the companion do. The ones like multi-attack, multi-shot, the warrior, swordmaster, archer, like true multiple attack talents. And I've said at this point, if there were one thing that I could really go back and change, it would be to change Claw Frenzy to work the way that those do, which is to say that you make a test and the test determines how many attacks you get to make.
Gotcha.
And I think that would greatly scale back some of the issues with Claw Frenzy just as a basic talent.
Fair.
I'm not sure. I can't address what the original design intent of Claw Frenzy was, except for the idea of, the Beastmaster and their claw attacks unarmed combat thing going on with their animal selves and doing multiple attacks well before any other disciplines get anything to that scale.
Yeah. I figured just attacking like a rabid badger was, maybe the genesis for it.
Yeah, I mean, something along those lines, but I can't directly address what the design what the design goal was in that, aside from maybe just, they get a really cool rabid badger kind of Wolverine frenzy thing.
Yes.
And later editions kind of tried to scale back the nastiness of it a little bit. But I think the fix that we came up with, the change that we made to other multi-attack talents in the companion, I think would work really, really well as a fix to Claw Frenzy in the same way. Yeah.
So thank you, Rasmus. Enjoy the shows. You're about 60 behind, so as you listen to them, feel free to send us some new emails as well. So thank you, K. Scott. Thank you, Brian. On to one from Tim. Greetings, Dan and Josh. This morning I finished episode 38 while walking the dog in a torrential downpour. Despite my and my dog's shared misery, I was particularly impressed with your discussion on the attitudes and interaction. Normally, Earthdawn Survival Guide is 100% Earthdawn goodness. This one fits 150% in a 100% package. An awe-inspiring feat in anything outside the TARDIS itself. Perhaps it was because you had recorded and lost this particular discussion twice already by the time you got to it in the can. I have a far more solid understanding of Earthdawn's social interaction tests than before. I have been listening straight through to the Earth EDSG since a 15-hour drive at the beginning of July. I've had a dozen or more questions as I've listened, but I've decided to hold off on them until I'm caught up. Thanks to your work and a certain friend rekindling my desire to play Earthdawn, I now have 6 excited players working on characters. Our first actual adventure session is set for August 26th, 2021. Keep up the excellent work. Thank you again for all the hard work you both put into the Earthdawn Survival Guide. We are all better equipped as players and GMs because of it. Tim.
So that certain friend that he mentions is me.
Oh!
Tim
Mind blown.
Tim is a buddy of mine. I met him when I was temping for a company that he was working at up here in Maine back in the late 90s. And ran an Earthdawn game for him and one of the other guys from the office there, and a couple of other folks had an Earthdawn game that I ran. So this was back in first edition days and whatnot. He was part of sort of the regular crew.
Yeah.
Tim had sort of moved on to other places and whatnot, and came back up here for a visit with family or some other sort of thing that was going on back in early July. Yeah. And one evening he came over and we did like a board game night with him and me and the kids and hung out and caught up and whatnot. And it is probably on his drive back to his home down in the Mid-Atlantic area from here that he started listening to the Survival
podcast. Guide. Yeah. That's a quickly growing
Tim
seed you planted there.
Yeah. Tim is great, and he's been on the Discord and asking questions, and it's great to kind of reconnect with him and rekindle his appreciation for the game. So it's great to see that email come across.
We'll take old players, new players, doesn't matter who you are, we'll take you. So welcome back, Tim. Please keep the emails coming and or stay active on Discord. We'll see you there too. On to one from Anthony. Hello, Dan and Josh. The last 3 months I've been running a new campaign of Earthdawn. I've been consuming your podcast very rapidly and appreciate the insight you bring to the players and storytellers. At times, it is very helpful to know the reason behind the why. I have a couple of questions about the threaded items. 1. I would like to know your feelings on the scope of event that would create a threaded item. Personally, I look at the level of importance or emotional impact an event has to play in the ongoing story. Another option I have used was the unique situation. Lemon, one of my players, mentioned in an email how he used a special forge to make his armor. He was assisted by a spirit of the forge, and there was a tremendous amount of raw magic in the area. The player has since learned he was under an effect similar to casting raw magic without a matrix or grimoire. The reason he was crafting the armor was to help his friends. He did not feel like he was strong enough to shield them from danger. I allowed that this unique setting and his emotions were enough to bring the armor to life, so to speak, and it is a novice thread item.
Yeah, that all sounds cool.
I'm down with that story. I'd love to play in this adventure, in this campaign. Number 2, I would also like to know your take on how the first question might impact a threaded item. If you have a novice level item and the situation of and events seem to be significant enough, would you make it a journeyman item or higher? What would that do to threads that are already woven to it, since novice threads cost less legend and could be considered weaker? Anthony.
So there are a couple of things here. This subject of characters creating their own thread items, whether intentionally or as the result of events in the campaign, or the growth of thread items over the course of a campaign, is something that has come up quite a number of times over the years. It is not something that was ever really addressed in first edition, or even really in later editions. Even up through fourth, we don't really talk about that as a concept, in part because of the strong theme in the game of discovering the past and the need to research and learn about the history of an item in order to unlock its secrets. That said, I completely understand the desire that people would have to have their own items become more powerful, whether becoming a thread item or gaining more power as a thread item over the course of a campaign. I don't really have any strong guidelines for how to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm reluctant, and I think Morgan likewise is a little bit reluctant to create hard and fast rules for that, because that is an opportunity for people who are not necessarily interested in the story and narrative potential of that, but rather in the twinkifying number avenue of saying, this has been published in the book, therefore you need to let me do this.
Fair.
That said, to kind of address the questions, if you feel as a game master that a particular event in the course of your campaign is significant enough that it should perhaps make an item a thread item, I really, really think that you would want to make it a novice item. The time scales and amount of magical interaction that would be involved, as far as I perceive it, to make more powerful items is something that kind of is a little bit beyond the scope of a normal campaign. Setting aside the rules and guidelines that are in the companion for deliberately enchanting, deliberately creating a thread item through the process of enchanting, that's separate from the spontaneous creation of a magic item that I think captures people's attention so strongly. So if you want it to happen, it should be a novice item. In the Legends of Earthdawn game, Feindar's Wit was a non-magical sword. It was just a regular sword that Feindar, the elf air sailor, Rusty's original character, was carrying, and then he died, and Scratch took it up and is sort of carried on in memory of his companion and so forth. It's been created. It is a novice thread item. And I think, you really want to lean into the role-playing and storytelling and narrative aspects of that. Okay, it becomes a thread item, but it's novice, and you kind of decide what the powers are going to be based on what fits from the story. When it comes to existing items that maybe you want to have grow during the campaign, you wouldn't actually change the tier of the item. At that point, what you're looking at are quote-unquote legendary items. A standard novice thread item is limited to 4 ranks, but you can have a legendary novice item that would have more, but those subsequent ranks would have to be unlocked through deeds, usually. And those items, they still stay at the original, in the original tier, in the original cost structure that they were a part of, but they gained their power through the interaction with magic and through notable events that they were involved with in some way. And so what you would do is, okay, you've got your initial 4, well then, to get, say, rank 5 or rank 6, if you are going to kind of expand it a little bit farther, as the characters maybe get into higher journeyman or even into low, circles 9, 10 kind of thing, and they want to continue using that item, and so you want to have that item grow along with them as well, rather than run into the situation of, I've now got a sword that is not, like, its potential is capped out. You just basically have some deeds. You find moments in the narrative, like major campaign milestones or significant events. I wouldn't do it of like, oh, you blew up your dice 6 times. Now you've got to, like, there would have to be a really strong narrative story baseline for that. And then say, okay, that was the deed that increased the power. So now you have a rank 5 that's available and it does this kind of thing. So that's my feeling on that.
Fair. I got nothing to add. I think all that's done quite well. So any further specific examples, by all means, send them to us. We'll see what we can have, pick Josh's brain on the rest of those. Now it's time for Josh to go to the bathroom or get a drink because we have a very long email. We set the longest for last. This is our old friend Kogorsi, who writes to us. Greetings, Dan and Josh. I write to you now for the first time on my own, having learned to read and write that silly language you call English from my friend the scribe. It has been the better part of a year since my last correspondence, and for that I give you my sincere apologies. After a year of roughing it in the wilds, I have come to my home in Carafad, and the elders have scolded me as a churl and poor friend for not staying in touch with friends. Although I believe they were referring to the tribe, I understand it applies to my other friends as well. I must also mention that I got the impression that Dan misses using my voice while he reads my letters on the show. I find it a great honor that he is up to the task, and he is welcome as an honorary orc and member of my tribe. As it has been such a long time since my last message, I hope I don't prattle on for too long, and if I do, feel free to break it up into parts. I'll catch you up briefly on my recent activities. I am now a Master Axe Master, formerly known as the gigantic Two-Handed Axe Master. My disagreeable Ghost Master insists that I use 2 feeble elf-sized weapons to advance my discipline, so, with many regrets, I had a great weaponsmith split my glorious gigantic devil-bearded axe in 2. I still have 3 righteous beards, but now 2 of them are on separate axes. Probably too big for still for an elf, so I might be able to keep my pride. I have been listening to the show every week, even on the road, but I've been unable to write in as I was pretty busy for a while. Returning home didn't change this one bit, though. Our horses have been serving themselves as lunch to some wyverns, and of course it should be Master Kogorsi that deal with it. No mention of the anger it may bring from the dragon that hatched them, and surely the rich Axemaster can afford to pay for the losses of the herd. Ugh. Anyways, I must comment about the subjects of the show since we last spoke. I am delighted to tell you I listened to every one, even though I expected to skip the quester topics being what you would call a secular name-giver. Good advice from dragons to pay them no mind. Although I did find the show surprisingly of interest to me, just please don't forward any of those quester missionaries my address. I get pestered enough already as it is. Your discussion of Carafod brought me great joy. And just to let you know, we are far enough away from Landis that we don't quite hold so much of a grudge against talent-stealing humans as they do in some parts. Our little clan has humans, elves, and even a handful of Tiskrang. We would welcome those strange-sized name-givers as well, but we raise only the finest horses, and those who aren't the proper size to ride them have a rough time out here. As to dragons, I enjoyed those episodes as well, and even though my response is quite tardy, I would like to add that I would very much like to hear more. Even more so should you go at length on discussing our most glorious and beneficent patron dragon of Carafod. I was relieved to hear you both speak so respectfully of dragons, as I value your well-being, which leads me on to an important topic. Back in my slightly more reckless youth, when I was known as the Barber of Bartertown, I made the enmity of a member of the royal family of Thrall. Seems he didn't like me courting his daughter and shaving the beard of his oldest son with my gigantic two-handed axe. Although I do not deny the accusations, I was eventually charged with some minor crimes and given community service and what you would call a restraining order. My service had me working for a sanitation crew with the Muckers Guild of Thrall. They learned to appreciate the hard work of an orc that was willing to get in the muck and get his hands dirty, so to speak. So when my service was up, they insisted I join their guild. We still keep in touch on occasion, and I will say they finally caught up to me with a frantic and surely expensive grave message when I arrived home recently. It seems that word of your show has spread, and some in Thrall are even able to listen. The Muckers were a little hot under the collar for some of the things said in the Bloodwood episode. They say they are petitioning the king to file a formal order to cease and desist, but I assured them that I could discuss the issue with you without legal action being necessary. It would appear, at least as the translation appears in Throlic, that Josh called our great queen of the wood a garbage person. In Landis and some other parts, we Muckers are known colloquially as garbage people or garbage name givers, and sometimes garbage takers. The members of my esteemed guild dislike associations with the people of the Bloodwood for many reasons, including their diplomat's penchant for clogging the sewers with their too large for the pipe's use of Bloodwood tree leaves to wipe. I personally do not take such offense to Josh calling her a garbage person, but I am concerned that our great queen of the wood may not take a liking to it. Certainly, no one would speak of a dragon like that, but of course her majesty is no dragon. Hopefully, you are distant enough to not garner her attention and wrath. Even better would be the possibility that garbage person is a huge compliment I am unaware of being so new to your language. Either way, I wish you safe travels and a full belly, the two most important things in my clan. Anyways, I made a promise to discuss the matter, and I will leave it at that. Sorry for filling my letter with hardly any questions or suggestions. Life as a master is not nearly as fulfilling as I expected it to be. Everyone seems to think I should do increasingly dangerous jobs that pester and annoy those much stronger than me. I have half a mind to run off to a distant library and join the scholar path. Good speaking to you both, and as I say in my parts, may your drinking cup stay filled as your belly, and your worries part with the winds. Your greatest friend, Kogorsi. P.S. If Dan finishes reading this without needing an elementalist to heat food for his throat, he has passed the first test of initiation to my tribe. Next and final test is a single swig of Hurlg.
I've got nothing to say to that, except that was amazing.
And
wow.
Scene.
And scene. Thank you, Kogorsi, for that
Absolutely.
Lovely missive.
You want to discuss the whole garbage person thing? It's not a mistranslation.
No. It's a different context, and it's not a compliment.
No.
In this case, garbage person is not a person who collects garbage, which is a noble and honorable profession.
And necessary.
This is a person who is garbage, which is to say they probably should just get taken away and left on a rubbish tip somewhere.
Yeah.
And if Alachia doesn't like it, what's she gonna do to me?
Nothing. Nothing at all. But anyway, so on to thank you everyone for writing in. We appreciate all the emails, love them all dearly, and love answering questions, especially when we get to pick Josh's brain. So thank you for all of those. On to the second half of the episode, the arrow-entical portion where Josh gets to talk more than I do, finally. And we're going to talk about Alamaise. And Josh actually prepped for this one.
I actually prepped for this. So, disclaimer. First off, I did read the chapter from the original Dragon's Book draft. It's probably very similar to the one in the Living Room Games version.
Probably.
But it was easier for me to find my version of the original.
Yeah, fair.
So I read the chapter and I went, oh, this is where a lot of the secrets of the dragon's relationship to the immortal elves got spilled. So a lot of the questions that people had been asking, because I haven't read this chapter in probably 20 years.
Mm-hmm. But your super great brain just caught a lot more than it had originally.
A lot of the stuff that people were asking about, like, where did you find out about this? How did you know? Blah, 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 blah. A lot of it is in this chapter. Alamaise, as mentioned in this essay, doesn't show up in Barsaive. Apparently, he has a lair that's kind of just to the northeast of the Bloodwood. Maybe the outcast isn't sure. He is technically, because the Wyrm Wood was his domain, he is still considered part of the great dragons of Barsaive, but he has not involved himself in Barsaivian affairs in any capacity since before the Scourge.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually maybe a really good question to toss Lou's way, is whether the decision to include Alamaise in this book, when Alamaise had not previously, aside from a mention in the history of what had gone on in the past, both in the original Earthdawn core book and the Bloodwood sourcebook from first edition, whether the inclusion of Alamaise in this book was intended mainly to spill some of the tea about the relationship between the dragons and the immortal elves, whether it was something that was a hook to lead to potential exploration of Blood Elf / Bloodwood / possibly Shosara and Western Kingdoms / Seriatha plotline that was kind of percolating in the background of first edition. And my response to that is actually, why not both? Lou was really, really good as a developer and designer of having things serve multiple purposes. So this does really, really well in terms of providing a whole lot of background info while also raising some questions, and also potential hooks for the future.
That's the best writing in Earthdawn.
Having read this, I'm kind of sorry that I did not push to have Kyle and Carl and Michael do a little bit more with possibly tying Alamaise into the Elven Nations manuscript.
Fair.
Because Alamaise, aside from the mention, I think that's in the history of Elven Nations, isn't mentioned or really dealt with much in any way. And I'm feeling now that like that is a potential missed opportunity. And having reread this, going, if we do something to explore more of the Wood and the redemption of the Wood storyline, it's probably important that we include Alamaise in some capacity.
Agreed. Because Alamaise, most people may not know, is the former master of Wyrm Wood.
Not only that, at least according to the information that the Outcast presents here.
Yes.
Alamaise is the one who reportedly persuaded Jaspree to create Oakheart, the mystical tree that is at the heart of Wyrm Wood. And Wyrm Wood was his lair and domain, and the elves that lived there were his servants, his kingdom. The regular elves, in addition to the immortal ones, because the Outcast comes out and says, yeah, he changed form and like slept with some elves and had his children, that the immortals are his children. Mountain Shadow does point out in his commentary on this that Alamaise is not the only one who sired immortal elves.
Yeah.
And that it's very interesting that, understanding that this is a document that was intended at least in part for the Dinarastis clan, why he is presenting the information that he is to them in a certain way. The details that he withholds shed perhaps some light into his motivations and what's going on. He does mention quite a bit that there is potentially some bad blood that would appear between Alamaise and the outcast, because the outcast basically says, I succeeded where he failed. And that Alamaise's first dragonkin offspring was Cainrith.
Yes.
Does not come out and say at any point that Cainrith and Alachia are the same.
No.
They very well may not be, but they could be.
There's allusions to.
There are some kind of allusions to that, yeah.
Yeah.
But the Outcast's narrative very clearly talks about them as if they are separate people. And it is possible that they are. It could be that Alachia is just another of the really first generation. It is fairly clear to me, though, that Alachia is almost certainly one of Alamaise's children.
Yeah.
At least that's the impression that I come away from this essay with.
Or perhaps just because they have different names, therefore they have a different pattern on the world, and therefore they're treated as separate people. They just might be the same inhabited spirit,
I don't think you need to get that complex. Lou has confirmed that Alachia has been Queen of the Wood before, just under different names. Gotcha. And it would make a lot of sense, knowing what we know about Alachia's temperament and her attitude, and the fact that she considers herself the ultimate queen of the elves, like everything that is elf derives from her, and how that ties into the story that's woven here of how the elves and the immortal elves that were kind of shepherding the elves of Wyrm Wood, and consequently elven culture across sort of the known world, all ended up. It all plays really, really strongly into what we know about Alachia and her temperament and psychology and all the rest of that. And her absolute desire to not lose the wood, to not lose her position, to not lose the respect. She is very much Alamaise's daughter.
Yes, because speaking of temperament, Alamaise is a great dragon who had a disagreement with his brother dragon, which Josh will get to in a minute or so, and fled to Barsaive. But based upon his temperament, Alamaise considers every living being beneath him, and he wants to rule all and believes it is his right to rule all, beginning with the Bloodwood.
Well, because the Bloodwood, the Wyrm Wood, was his territory. Like, that was his lair. He created it. He shepherded it and guided it. And the loss of it, he's a very petty dragon in some ways. He bears quite the grudge. The fact that he does not generally have name-giver servants. Since the betrayal, since the immortal elves, since his children, since the other dragon's children betrayed him, he does not trust name-givers. The lesson that he kind of took from that is a very different one than I think Mountain Shadow took from the betrayal. Part of that ties into Mountain Shadow's psychology of wanting to understand everything. I think Mountain Shadow, at least on some level, understands why whatever happened, happened. And I think Alamaise took a very different lesson, which was, okay, you ungrateful so-and-sos, I'm not going to bother with you anymore. And his drakes, the lesser drakes or false drakes, as they are alternately called, are a lot more animalistic and feral and do not have the ability to assume name-giver form, so that Alamaise doesn't need to deal with lesser beings in that sense. That there's
he'll use
primacy, there's a very, very distinctive draconic arrogance that is Alamaise. Certainly, obviously, we only discussed Mountain Shadow thus far, but is very, kind of counter to Mountain Shadow's. Mountain Shadow still considers dragons to kind of be superior, but he recognizes the potential of the younger races. and wants to kind of see what they can do. And I think when Mountain Shadow woke up in the 21st century with the arrival of the Sixth Age and saw what humanity had accomplished, was like, this is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And Alamaise, who also shows up in Shadowrun, is very prominent in a novel and an adventure, kind of early in the run, is very much not in the same school. He is a much more like kind of classic, like bad guy dragon kind of thing.
Yes.
And you referenced the brother. He is never named in Earthdawn. This is another of those little Easter eggs that is really kind of only there for those who were following both lines and paying attention. Alamaise's brother, it is revealed in the Shadowrun materials, is Lofwyr, which is to say the dragon that is head of whatever the name of the company
Rinraku
is.
Arcology?
No, not Rinraku.
Okay.
It's the German heavy industry company Megacorp.
Crap.
Whose
And
name
that one escapes me.
now escapes me, and I can hear
It's not as technology. I know that. So
keyboards
it's not,
being like hammered furiously
Yep.
as people try to
Scream
look
at
it
us, literally. They're listening in, and if they know Shadowrun, they're screaming at us because
Anyway.
I can't remember those anymore.
Yes, the brother in question that drove Alamaise away from his homeland in north central Europe, sort of the area, the eastern edge of Vasgothia and that area, into Barsaive. That is a grudge that carries through into Shadowrun because Alamaise likes to take every opportunity that he can to mess with Lofwyr's holdings. But Lofwyr is never mentioned by name in Earthdawn. Lofwyr did not ever appear, aside from these sort of mentions, did not appear in any Earthdawn product. We don't have any plans, nor do we, I think, have any right to have Lofwyr appear, even in the Vasgothia book.
Yeah.
We're leaving him alone.
Fair. So speaking of classic bad guy dragon, Alamaise is your classic appearing dragon. So when you think of what a dragon looks like, red scales, maybe gold underneath, this is Alamaise. He's your typical red-scaled dragon with a yellow underbelly. Because I like to describe how these all look. So Mountain Shadow was silver and blue. Alamaise is red and gold. So just the classic look there. Now, Alamaise is that petty and is that vindictive that he's the one who killed Queen Dahlia because she would not swear fealty to him.
Correct.
Way back when.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's that petty.
As far as I'm concerned, Dahlia was not one of the immortals. Dahlia was not really fully cognizant of the immortal history and the connection between the great dragons, Alamaise in particular, and the history of the Elven court in Bloodwood.
Yeah.
But, yeah, he killed her, and it was from that he earned the moniker Elfbane.
Yeah. That's because, really, Elfbane is his real name, and Alamaise is what the name givers call him, I believe, unless I have that backwards. But anyway, when the Wyrm Wood did the Ritual of Thorns and converted over to the Bloodwood, that actually severed his connection to that wood, and all of his threads are gone from there. So he no longer has... He'd like to personally lay claim to the wood, but the magic he had tied to that is no more.
Yeah. The multiple layers, one of the things that the Outcast theorizes within his essay on Alamaise is perhaps the reason that Alachia did not see the need to take up the Theron rights of protection was because of the magic that Alamaise had woven into the fabric of the wood itself, and that in conjunction with her own not insignificant magical knowledge would be sufficient to protect the wood from the horrors, acting as kind of a dragon lair of sorts. And unfortunately that didn't work, but the consequences, we've talked about the Ritual of Thorns and all of the stuff that it did, the renaming of the wood, had the fortunate side effect of maybe it also fractured all of the magical connections that Alamaise still had to the wood even at that point, despite the fact that he had not been resident in it for quite some time. Because, of course, great dragons are really, really good with pattern magic and probably would have had connections to the wood that he would have been able to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
So, Alamaise is something perhaps as a game master that you would want to consider if you are going to be running a game that is going to be heavily involving the politics of the Bloodwood and the fate of the Bloodwood and the potential redemption of the Bloodwood. The Outcast does mention that possibly the Seekers of the Heart, the living legend cult that is dedicated to the redemption of the wood, might be backed or supported in some direct or indirect way by Alamaise. That basically Alamaise's one concern is the wood. And he offers some ways, some suggestions to the Denerastus, along with some warnings as to how they might be able to manipulate this single driving force of Alamaise to meet their ends. That ultimately the Outcast in his arrogance is basically like, yeah, I'm smarter than all of the rest of them, and here's some ways that we might be able to manipulate either the wood or Alamaise or both in order to do what we want.
Yeah.
You know, Mountain Shadow keeps kind of mentioning in his asides, hey, look, this is what he is telling his children. Don't believe what he might be offering you as a way of getting the wood back, because he'll turn around. This is for his own ends. Ultimately, this is not going to be of a benefit to you if he gets what he is after. The Outcast, as I mentioned, does have some warnings that if Alamaise kind of finds out that the Denerastus are a success where he failed, that he would take it rather personally.
Yeah.
And a great dragon being upset
is not a good thing.
Not a good thing, no.
Because Alamaise knows clearly, I mean, he's one of the original dragons. He knows a lot of magic.
Yeah.
And he primarily likes elementalism. So, you know, that's why he, helped build the wood, because in Earthdawn, as you should know by now, wood is one of the 5 elements. So he knows a lot.
I just remembered, by the way, the corporation that Lofwyr is head of in Shadowrun is Satyr-Krupp.
Oh, good. Satyr? Oh, yeah, okay. In German, usually the second vowel is pronounced. So Satyr-Krupp, yeah.
Completely irrelevant, but I wanted our listeners to know that I did remember you do not need to send, if you've already sent the email, that's fine. But if you have not sent the email yet, there is no need to send the email.
We know.
We figured it out.
Josh looked it up.
I didn't actually look it up. I grabbed my Shadowrun 2nd edition book thinking I'd be able to find it in there, and I couldn't easily. And then I was just putting it up, I'm like, that's what it is.
There you go. I have the same thing. Every once in a while, just hold the book in your hand and go, "That's what it is." But it'll trigger the memory in there somewhere. So,
where were we?
Anything else we should bring up about Alamaise?
Well, I think you were in the middle of something.
To go over, but
like it seemed like you were in the middle of something before I.
No, that was just it. I'm like, yeah, no, don't deal with this dragon because he's nasty. He's mean. He's the bad guy.
Because he has not been involved with the affairs of the Dragon Council of Barsaive, because he has largely been off on his own, nursing his own grudges and plans with regards to the Wyrm Wood and the immortal elves and all of that, the only real way that he would be involved in a game would be something that is relating to the wood in some sense.
Fair. Otherwise, yeah, you pretty much want to avoid using Alamaise unless you desperately have to, because he's not going to treat any name giver with any amount of respect. They're all beneath him. He is your typical malignant narcissist type thing.
Yeah, in some respects.
That's where
the Outcast does say that the betrayal by Cainreth is the reason that the Great Dragons forbid further mating of dragons with younger races.
Gotcha.
And there are a lot of answers that are given in this essay. There are a few other interesting ones that are hinted at but not answered, like in response to the history of things, Mountain Shadow's commentary, the children of the dragons do not solely belong to Elfbane. They are all our children, errant though they may be. Indeed, if it weren't for the disaster which followed the rebellion, We kind of know what the rebellion is, but the disaster followed it.
Yeah.
I talked about the idea that the magic cycle was artificially created, that it is the result of an unforeseen side effect of some kind of ritual magic. And it's possible that it wasn't the dragon's ritual magic, but it was part of the rebellion, part of the immortal elves that were fighting against their parents to seize control and tried to do something to force them into hibernation that kicked off the magic cycle. And if that's the case, I mean, that seems kind of weird in a sense, because that sounds to me like something that Cainrith / Alachia likely would have been involved with and would have taken a very different, potentially a very different lesson from when it comes to ritual magic and the unforeseen consequences thereof.
But that would explain like ripples into water when you dunk a pebble in a pond. Just the up and down cycles of magic would be the ripples. Therefore,
again, Mountain Shadow is being cagey because the people that he is talking to, who are the other great dragons, know what he's talking about. He doesn't need to spell it out because they know. And I think it's a great bit of writing. Obviously, they're talking about something that they all know what he's referring to, so he doesn't need to spell it out. Mm-hmm. We don't get this kind of stupid, like, maid and butler dialogue. If it weren't for the disaster, which, as you know, was when blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It's very, this thing happened. You know what I'm talking about. When he's also talking about the rebellion. Like, you know what happened. We talked about in the Mountain Shadow episode. Remember what happened the last time, because we were all there. You know, you don't need me to tell you. I'm just reminding you, remember that thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that kind of covers that. Alamaise is the dragon that you kind of maybe look to if you're dealing with major elven stuff.
Yeah. And
he's not likely to be friendly to anybody.
Oh, not in any way, shape, or form. No. You better be armed to the teeth if you're going to go even try to have a conversation with him, because he's not going to grant you an audience unless you really have something to give him. But other than that, I think that covers the high points and low points, especially of Alamaise and his involvement with the Bloodwood and Wyrmwood, depending on which time you want to talk about. So if you have any questions for us about Alamaise the Great Dragon, or anything else we talked about in the episode,
or thoughts or commentary, like,
if anything,
if you wanted the tea on the whole like elf dragon thing, grab the dragon's source book and read that Alamaise chapter. It doesn't reveal everything, but that's where a lot of information,
a lot of hints
becomes a little bit more clear.
Yes. A lot of hints are dropped there. So until next time, folks, it is time for you to be the Bane, Elf Bane, of your own legend.
Good night, everybody.